Quran is a messed up place. It is a collection of several manuscripts, and it is now claimed to be a book containing the words of God. It has pages from various scriptures from around the region. It has pages, I'm pretty sure, from the writings who were calling themselves the Zoroastrians, or from those who were calling themselves the Sabiyuns, or who were calling themselves the Jews or Christians. If you read the Quran, you will see that the resurrection story is there. Feeding the multitude by Jesus is there. The Lord's Supper is there. The journey of St. Paul and Barnabas are there. You can find all this by looking from a different angle. You don't read the Quran by the interpretations from the Muslim scholars. You don't do that because they have played with translations. You're trying to read the Quran, you will see there are brackets there, here and there, brackets everywhere. Because the Arabic grammar, which the Quran followed, was developed by the Iranians, believe it or not, the Persians. So the Arabic grammar is still not to the best of shapes in the Quran. It has broken sentences everywhere. For today, I'm going to tell you where you can find the Lord's Supper and where you can find about the journey of St. Paul and Barnabas. In Quran chapter 36, if you read these verses, especially verse 12, verse 20, verse 68, and if you also read the last few verses of this chapter, you will see here Allah is saying that He can reverse the life of someone or His creation if He wants to give him a longer life. He can reverse His creation. So how does He reverse His creation? In 36:12, Allah is saying that He can resurrect the dead. And also, in verse 82 of this surah, you will see Allah is saying that if He wants to do something, He just says be, and it is. Because here, in this chapter, Allah is telling the story of St. Paul and Barnabas going their way to do their preachings about Jesus and the good news and the promise of forgiveness and salvation. Abdullah Yusuf Ali, the most revered English translator of the Quran, said that Allah is telling the story of St. Paul and Barnabas here about their preachings of Jesus' gospel. If you read Surah 3 or chapter 3, verse 47 in the Quran, you will see Allah is reassuring Maryam or Mary, Virgin Mary, that you will bear a baby. And Virgin Mary was wondering how was that possible because no man ever touched her. And Allah was reassuring her that if He had plans to do something, all He had to do is say be, and it is. And you also find it again in the same chapter, chapter 3, verse 59, when Allah is saying the similitude of Jesus was that of Adam. All he had to do is say be, and there it was. The Quran also says that When Allah created Adam, He blew His ruh in him and his body got life. And again, the same applies to the story of Virgin Mary, that Allah's word was blown into her womb and Jesus came into existence in his mother's womb. So this proves conclusively that Surah 36 is in fact talking about Jesus and his resurrection. And also, if you read chapter 4, verse 157 of the Quran, you will see that most of the Muslim translators will tell you that here Allah is saying that Jesus was not killed on the cross, neither was he crucified. But the Arabic word wama doesn't necessarily mean or. It means and. That means he was, in fact, the translation should be, he was not killed by crucifixion. If you read Surah 5, verse 33, it reads, the penalty of waging war against Allah would be the punishment of death or crucifixion. The word is aw in Arabic, which means or. But in the previous verse that I told you, Surah 4, verse 157, the word in Arabic between crucifixion and death is wama. Wama doesn't necessarily mean or. That's why the Ahmadiyya community among the Muslims, they are the minority community, and they claim that Jesus was crucified, but he didn't die. Allah is trying to say that he didn't die on the cross, because he didn't die is repeated in the same paragraph. If you read Surah 4, verse 157, the main emphasis is his death. That means he didn't die. So when he said he didn't die, that means they didn't succeed in killing him, because Allah brought him back to life. I think that's what Allah was trying to say. Because in Surah 4, 157, you read that the main issue is that the Jews were rejoicing that they were successful in killing Jesus. But Allah said, he tricked them, which I don't agree with anyway, because why should God trick the Jews? Because that's not godly thing to do. So the miracle is Allah brought him back to life. And why not? Why should it be difficult? Why Muslims don't accept this? Many prophets were humiliated. Muhammad allegedly lost one of his teeth in a battle. Many prophets were humiliated, mocked. Even Surah 36 confirms that. So just to have an excuse that Allah didn't want his prophet to be humiliated. Because if someone humiliates you or tries to humiliate you, that's the common sense, unjustly, in fact, you don't get humiliated. The whole community, the barbaric community that humiliates an innocent man, in fact, is humiliated in history later on. Now, if you read verses 111 to 116 of chapter 5, you will see that Allah is reminding the followers of Jesus that you did have an agreement with Jesus, that you accepted him as his prophet and you accepted God as your savior, as your Lord, as your master. But what happened to you guys? Then Jesus was asked to produce a miracle or to provide food for them. And Jesus prayed to God, and God said, after this, if you deny him, then you'll be punished. So Allah continues the conversation with Jesus in verse 116. It continues. You see, it begins with what is not he will say in future. It's part of the ongoing conversation from 111 to 116. All the Muslim scholars will mislead you in this translation. All of them. They will say in future, in future, in future. Kala, kala, was kala. No. It is a part of ongoing conversation until 116. Where in 116, Allah is just asking Jesus, did you tell them you were their Lord, or did you tell them your mother was part of the Trinity or one of the gods? And he said, if I do, you would know. And Jesus was saying that when I was among them. So Muslims try to tell you that this conversation is taking place on the judgment day, which is not true. The reason being, in 116, when Jesus is talking to God, he's talking in private. Or when he goes away, wants to talk to God, as he always does, as mentioned in the Bible. So if you read John, because the story of feeding the multitude is mentioned in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John everywhere. So if you read John especially, you will see that Jesus, after hearing about the death of John the Baptist, he went away, and then people followed him. He prayed to God, and food, and people were fed. Thousands of people were fed with just a small amount of food. That was the miracle. So that's the story which is being told from 111 to 116. So there's nothing in the Quran to say that God met Jesus after his death, because no Muslim can tell you exactly what happened to Jesus. Where is he now? And etc. But they will tell you that in verse 119 and 120, it means that Jesus was told that Allah is not going to be unjust to anyone, and he is going to punish on this day anyone who is a sinner and who didn't commit any sin, and etc. They'll go to heaven. They will not have anything to worry. But it doesn't again necessarily mean that Allah is telling all this on the judgment day. Rather, this kind of conversation in the pattern, in this very pattern, is common all over the Quran. I have found many examples that haza, that means on this. In fact, it means this very day. They're talking about the judgment day. On the very day of the judgment day, Allah will do justice. That's all. So this is not, in fact, confirmation. Verse 120 is no way a confirmation that Jesus is having the talk with God on the judgment day. Rather, from 111 of chapter 5 until 116 of chapter 5 just simply confirms the story of Jesus feeding the multitude. Verse 111, when Allah is saying that you did accept Jesus and me, in fact, he was trying to remind the followers of Jesus of the promise or the communion they had during the Lord's Supper. That's all. Nowhere in the Quran Allah called Muhammad the Holy One. Rather, in chapter 46, verse 9, you can read that if that very verse was in any way referring to Muhammad, then he was a sinner and he was not sure about heaven. But Jesus is called holy in the Quran, and he was also called a mercy. Clearly, according to Quran, Jesus was a prophet from the very birth, but Muhammad became a prophet at the age of 40. So Jesus never sinned, because verse 116 confirms that Jesus didn't do anything without the permission of Allah. And Surah 21 verse 91 says that Jesus was a sign for all mankind. And Jesus was also praying for his own people. If you read Surah 5 from 117 onwards, 117, 118, you will see that Jesus was praying to Allah for forgiveness of his people. So when Muslims say only Muhammad will be praying to Allah, won't be given the permission for shahada to Allah, then my question is, why not? Will Muhammad be praying for Jesus' followers as well? If not, then how can you call him Rahmatul lil Alameen? How? Then if you call him Rahmatul lil Alameen, then if you are telling me that he'll be praying for the salvation of Jesus' followers as well, then my question is, why Jesus, we see, is praying, as you say, to God on the judgment day in verse 117 and 118 of Surah 5. Surah 19, verse 21 of the Quran confirms that Jesus was a mercy for mankind. It doesn't say only for his own people or only for his own region. There's not a single verse in the whole Quran to say, even the Quran, the book, was given to someone named Muhammad. It says to a Rasul, "Oh Rasul, I gave you this Quran," but doesn't mention which Rasul or which prophet. And also the name Muhammad can't be sustained grammatically in Arabic, because Muhammad, the words which start with mu, to make it simple, they are common noun. For example, mutazila or muazzin, the caller of the prayer, and munafiq, or the deceivers. These are all common nouns, not proper nouns. Only this name Muhammad breaks all these rules, the Muslim grammarians say, which doesn't make sense because the Kasra rules do not support this. And again, the Hebrew word for Muhammad is Mahmad, and you will find this in the Solomon song when Solomon is calling his beloved, his wife beloved or beautiful or lovely. And you can also find this in Hosea chapter. So this word by no means in the Bible referring to Muhammad as the prophet of Islam. So if you read the verses even in the Quran, where you can find Muhammadim, Muhammadan, you will never find Muhammad, you will find Muhammadim, Muhammadan. These are all adjectives. So you will see the verses saying, for example, in Surah 3, verse 144, you will see that Allah is saying that if the prophet dies, will you just leave your faith? Because prophets in the past, they lived, they died, they had families and all that. But Jesus never had a family. So the prophet, Allah is talking about it directly in Surah 3, verse 144, is not said that this prophet before you has a family, but it is saying the prophets before him had families that, they came and then they died. So are you going to leave the faith if he dies? Because the followers of Jesus, they were worried when the Romans were coming. They were worried that they were afraid for their lives, and Jesus did let them go. In fact, this is referring to this scenario. And Muslims can never really explain this verse, Surah 3, verse 144, what it really meant. Because they're trying to make some stories in the hadith. It was a verse which was revealed from the mouth of a follower who was holding the flag during the battle of Badr. And some will say, well, this happened at the Battle of Uhud and all that. They can never reconcile this verse. And some will even say that this was uttered after the death of Muhammad by Abu Bakr. When was actually revealed? Nobody is sure about it. And also, if you read Surah 33, chapter 33, verse 40, it says, Muhammad, you are not the father of anyone, which Jesus was not. You are a Rasul. So, Rasul means prophet, by the way. But Muhammad did have boys, 2 boys, both of them died, Ibrahim and Qasim, they died. And Muslim scholars or translators will try to engage mental gymnastics and tell you these are talking about adult men. In fact, that's not true. Jesus was not the father of any child. But in Surah 3, verse 40, if it was meant for Muhammad, he already had 2 boys, both of them died, but He had two boys. So I believe that the Muhammad in the Quran, in fact, means beloved prophet. So the understanding of Jesus in the Quran is quite similar to the understanding of Jehovah's Witnesses of today. Thank you very much for listening. I'll come with more evidences in future.